Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the 2022 Outlook series, host Craig Jeffery joins Royston Da Costa, Assistant Group Treasurer at Ferguson, to discuss the outlook of quantum computing. They explore this developing technology, discuss how it's relevant to finance and treasury, reveal which companies are using it now, and its impact on cybersecurity. Listen into this important discussion to find out more.
Royston, welcome to the Treasury Update podcast.
Hi, Craig. Good to meet you again, albeit virtually.
I think the last time we did a podcast, was that about a year ago or?
About a year ago, absolutely.
I love talking technology with you, what your thoughts are, what's going on. And as we jump into this 2022 Outlook series, our title is Quantum Computing. And, it sort of sounds like science fiction in some regards, but it's also perhaps more real than we thought. And maybe you could start off by describing quantum computing. What is it, at least, conceptually, just broadly?
To be honest with you, Craig, I've always maintained I'm not a IT specialist or a technology specialist for that matter, but clearly we can't ignore technology is a part of everyone's life today, whether you've got an iPhone or smartphone, or whether you use you happen to be, sort of using Python for programming AI or machine learning. But quantum technology really came to my attention probably about a year and a half, possibly 2 years ago. It's not something new in many ways. You think about technology, actually, a lot of it's been around for a long time, but it's become more mainstream. And no surprises that the Chinese have been working on this technology for a good decade or so. And what really interested me is the description it has. One of its uses is the unhackable internet. But there's so much more to quantum computing. So I'll try and answer your question first by saying the power of quantum computing is a bit like when you look at what your classical computers can do today. If you look or are trying to identify a specific grain of sand, your classical computer will look at every grain of sand individually to find that specific grain. What a quantum computer can do is it will look at all of the grains simultaneously to find the one it's looking for immediately. So there you can see already there's a question, there's the benefit of speed, and obviously accuracy goes with that. But how on earth is that going to benefit Treasury, right? So we'll go to cut to the chase on this. For me, it's simply, we in Treasury are constantly working with solutions, and you look at what's happening in the payments space with the open banking and APIs. We're looking for speed, we're looking for transparency, we're looking for accuracy, we're looking for efficiencies in all of our processes. But here's the interesting part. If you look at what the impact the pandemic has had on a lot of corporates in Treasury, it's around cash flow forecasting. And that age-old issue has been around for years. If you ask any corporate treasurer, they're always going to say that's in their top 3, top 5 priorities. And no surprises, again, cash flow forecasting has become a very popular topic as we came out of the pandemic. So some of that quantum computing I can see lending itself to a solution that enables corporates to interrogate and harness vast amounts of data, but in a fraction of the time that it would have traditionally perhaps taken to look at it. And just one last point to mention, if you were to ask me, when do you see this coming in? Well, actually, it's already in. It's just that not many people, including myself, have actually seen it. And you might not even recognize it's in because perhaps the solution that you're looking at or you've been using doesn't necessarily tell you that. So I'll give you an example. I came across a company called Algodynamics, who Cambridge University initiated a venture, and they use quantum computing to forecast FX rates. And they've been around for a year or so, perhaps 2 years. Now, obviously, that's a different topic altogether, and you might want to look them up and see exactly what they're able to offer. But that's an amazing kind of, A, that they're using the technology already, but B, in terms of what it has to offer. But you can see, there's probably a myriad of situations within not just Treasury, but within wider society where this sort of technology could be very powerful and very useful.
Great intro and explanation of some people using it. I did want to ask a little bit more about quantum computing, and maybe I'll just talk through a few of the other areas. Is this a step change? Is this a continuation of what we're seeing in technology where we break components of systems down smaller and smaller, which allows us to go faster? Doesn't seem to be the case on this. Is it an extension of speed of processing? So we have things in, business intelligence where there's in-memory capabilities where you load millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of records in memory at once. And so the BI tools can process that almost at the same time. And there's obviously upper limits on that, but they're pretty massive, especially with scale. Is the ability to compute, is this just the next level of compute? It's not really just about memory, but it's the ability to process more data more quickly. I mean, how would you describe that as on this path of we can scale more rapidly, compute more quickly, do more things?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try, but as I said, I'm not one of these technical specialists that could kind of do this question any justice. But I mean, based on what I've read on the subject, with normal computers, you're dealing with bits, basically basic units of information that have two possible states, namely 1 or 0.
On or off, yeah.
Yeah, on. Quantum computers deal with qubits, which are also known as quantum bits. And those can be a 1, a 0, or both, 1 and a 0 at the same time, also referred to as a quantum superposition. By, I guess, the mere fact that you can have that type of scenario, multiple qubits allow for the creation of entangled states. And this is where you get into the security aspect of how it's virtually impossible to hack messages that are sent using quantum technology, or the quantum internet, they call it, because you don't know what both, or, it's kind of the various parts of the message are. And if you get one part of the message, then the other part is meaningless because it would just be, so it would just corrupt. But there's something else that I think is worth also mentioning in terms of quantum computing, and that's kind of the challenge there. Although companies like Google and IBM and Microsoft already have, are using them, it's quite difficult to kind of have a more mainstream quantum computer, like for likes of you or me, for example, in terms of having a device using it sort of on your person. And the reason is because it is incredibly sensitive to interference. And what that means effectively that they have to be kept isolated from all forms of electrical interference, and you wait for it, and chilled down close to absolute zero.
That's colder than your refrigerator, right?
Well, according to this, it's colder now since outer space. So I think there's a bit more time to go, but not to say that, if IBM, Microsoft, Google are all kind of racing to kind of develop this technology, and China's already been doing this for years and investing billions in it, on it rather. Just one last thing to mention in terms of the history behind this. So apparently it was in 1998 that Isaac Chang of the Los Alamos National Laboratory and Neil Gershenfeld of Massachusetts, MIT basically, and Mark Kubinik of the University of California, Berkeley, created the first quantum computer. So kudos to you guys. You came up with this technology in its coming forward from its origin. So it's, again, not getting too obsessed about the fact that it's quantum computing. And I've heard the term before, when you think of the futuristic sci-fi films that we may have watched growing up. The speed, absolutely, you can see that happening in every area of life that we're dealing with. If you're looking at, sort of autonomous vehicles, about sustainability and, sort of how electric cars have evolved, there's an element of urgency in some of these industries and in some of these areas of life. But then you've got the cyber fraud challenge, which affects clearly everyone, especially in terms of treasury. So technology like this, where hopefully there's hope, there's a possibility of improving how the security around our transactions and certainly interacting with banks, then absolutely, I'd be very interested to see more on this and take advantage as much as possible of what it has to offer.
As we talk a little bit more on the applications to finance and treasury, you just mentioned security. You talked about forecasting a little bit before. When you say unhackable, so this might allow us to move past some of the. I mean, criminals are very creative, and I can picture them saying, "Well, how do I use quantum computing to hack the unhackable and figure out ways around it?" But what is that going to mean for payment processes? How should we be thinking about this type of impact on fraud and security and defenses? In context of what we need to do today, too.
Nothing's ever guaranteed in life. We all know that. So we can never say, although it says the unhackable communication method, I'm sure there's always going to be someone someday that will come up with a way of how they can hack it. I mean, just as they did with the cryptocurrency, right? But you have to also think about the fact that at the moment, we're probably at the bottom end of the spectrum in many ways regarding cyber fraud. I was on a panel session yesterday, Eurofinance, talking about this very topic, cyber fraud, and how some of the experts in the industry from banks and from corporates talking about how we're kind of at the moment behind the curve, almost. We're trying to keep up. We're not even keeping pace with the cyber criminals. So when you're looking from that perspective, anything that can potentially improve where we are take us from where we are to where we could be is going to be better. The fact that we will probably never be one step ahead of the criminal, I don't know. Maybe we will one day, but certainly at the moment, it's hard to see that. The important thing, though, I would say, Craig, is in terms of the security aspect, quantum computing is very expensive. I mean, the companies I mentioned before, IBM, Microsoft Group, are huge companies. They have the resources to invest in this. I've always thought, and I've said this before, cyber criminals typically will look for, a bit like a stream, will look for the fastest way to a target. So the more robust your processes are, the more secure you've made yourself, and you've reviewed all the loopholes and tried to protect yourself with whatever best practices that are widely available, cyber insurance, so on and so forth, the less attractive you will be to cyber criminal. So there again, I would say, I don't know again what sort of costs we're looking at, but I can imagine it's quite substantial. Cyber criminals get involved in developing a quantum computer. It's not impossible, but the return on their investment would have to be fairly significant for them to gain anything out of it. And if the banks, say, for example, are using this technology to make it even more difficult for them to do that, then one would like to think, okay, there's some hope here for us. And so finally, to answer your question, I would say that it would be a situation where when we transact with our bank, apart from the processes that we have currently around making sure that, the supply details are validated, making sure you have multi-factor authentication, and making sure that you're well educated in terms of the phishing scams and all those good things. Then it's a question of really how do we, and this comes down to obviously the technical experts, putting in place this technology to ensure that the messages you're sending to your bank are completely watertight, and equally when it gets, and the payment details or the payment information you're sending to your beneficiary are also protected. So some way, then there shouldn't be any possibility for a third party or cyber criminal to, say, inverted commas, hack into that message and gain any of that data, as in some cases they've appeared to be able to do with companies today, as we quite often hear, some companies' data has been hacked.
As I listen to what you've said here, and you've described, some situations that are happening now with it, what it'll take, some of the challenges with it. It seems like if we try to fit this in with things like APIs, machine learning adoption, APIs, probably if you said a year of APIs, that's probably been 2021 in terms of going up the curve, or you said the years, it's probably 20 to 22 will be, shifting from a certain percentage to, the vast majority using that. Machine learning starting the upward curve as these capabilities are put on systems. And so, you're mentioning this is the very early days of quantum computing in finance. So I guess I'm asking you, when do you think it'll become much more common or start moving up the curve? And then really the other question is, how do we keep on top of this just so that we're paying attention to it as it becomes closer? Is this 10 years away? Is this 3 years away? What should we be thinking about time-wise?
Definitely, as a corporate, would like this to be no more than 3 years away, frankly, because there's so many pain points that this could help to resolve. And in terms of, again, I don't see me as an individual or as a corporate treasurer necessarily being introduced to a solution that says, well, this is kind of quantum, it's got quantum computing behind it, and therefore you should look at it for that reason. For me, it's more about looking at a solution that says, well, we can resolve your payment pain point regarding supply details, or we can resolve your KYC issues by kind of putting the solution in place, which is very secure. It's kind of going to come across that way. So, in terms of the algodynamics I mentioned earlier on, if it didn't mention to me that quantum computing was behind their solution, I wouldn't have even thought to ask or kind of query that. So, I would definitely. My hope would be it's sooner rather than later, given that it's already been in place for a while, and given that the Chinese in particular have been developing that technology for the last decade. I would like to think it's sooner rather than later. But if you're looking longer term, I would imagine that definitely within the decade, I can see it becoming a much more widely available technology, certainly in terms of the likes of the large companies like Amazon, Google, and IBM kind of rolling out potentially so products that you can basically run off their resource, if you like. And I see that happening, a bit like what Amazon are doing at the moment with their, I think they're called servers. They kind of hire out to startups and what have you. Amazon, is it called Amazon service? But it's a bit that but basically those large companies can afford to provide this type of technology, will kind of sort of lease it out, if I could put it that way, to the rest of the world, perhaps.
I'm just thinking about some of the things that you were saying there on the leasing it out. I think that makes a lot of sense as we've moved towards out of our own data centers to the cloud, to platforms as a service, and expanding that. It's really interesting to think about that. Thanks so much for your time on talking about the Outlook series and talking about quantum computing. Any final thoughts? And I know you want to talk about the metaverse, but we're going to have to do a separate podcast on the implications on finance and treasury from that. But I'll give you the opportunity for last thoughts.
Thanks, Craig. As I say, I try and always remind myself that I primarily work in treasury, and every time I look at technologies, I do like what I see, and I do like getting engaged in some of these developing and evolving technologies, especially when I can see there's going to be a specific benefit to what I do and to corporates and the treasury world. But I have to say, in the last year, and I'm pretty sure this is no surprise to a lot of your listeners, the banks have come into their own. I have to say, as much as on one hand, I feel frustrated that they're not kind of moving quickly enough as far as I'm concerned. But on the other hand, there are certain banks that have already begun to demonstrate they're engaged in moving forward. And I think that's so critical for banks generally across the world, because, as we all know, if you're not willing to move forward, then you will be left behind, especially when it involves technology. And the reason I say that simply, Craig, is because when you look back to when the pandemic first struck, and certainly from my recollection, say it was March 2020 when there was a lockdown in the UK, we were actually in the process of opening some accounts in the UK. And up to that point, it was like digital documents, no, we don't accept those. You have to be wet signatures. And lo and behold, The day after lockdown, it was suddenly, yeah, sure, we accept DocuSign, we accept Adobe Sign, which is great, which is absolutely fine. I mean, no criticism in that, but I just thought it's quite interesting how quickly the banks adapted, and well done to them. But then moving from there, what was also interesting is 5 years ago, I went to what some of our banking partners to talk about, potentially partnering with one of our fintechs to look at a kind of blockchain, distributed ledger technology-based solution, looking at supplier or vendor validation. And I don't think there was much appetite then for whatever reason. Some of those banks, or at least certainly one of those banks, is now themselves, and I know you said to keep clear, but I have to use this as an example, looking and investing in the metaverse, which, as we know, Facebook have rebranded the name the Meta, but also I know Microsoft are looking at that. And we can talk about this in a separate session, as you say. But the point being here that when banks start to put their weight behind some of these technologies, and we've already heard about the CBDCs, which is, central bank distributed cryptocurrency consortium, then you can expect to see change, and you can expect to see change happening quickly. So that's, for me, very encouraging that, the banks are beginning to kind of get involved. And also the last point on that is this I wouldn't say stigma, but perhaps almost aversion to partnering fintechs, mainly because I guess historically, fintechs were not a known entity, frankly. They haven't got the history the banks have, so on and so forth. But I think partly because of the way we've evolved with what they say experience with the pandemic, but also banks finally perhaps recognize that this is not a battle that they're in with the fintechs. Quite the opposite. If it's a battle, it's a battle to partner with the fintechs so that their customers like us can get the very solutions that we've been screaming for, you can go back as far as you like, but frankly, last 5 years.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.